Hello, and you're very welcome to the Music As podcast series. I'm Louise O'Connor, a fiddle player from Clare, and this is an interview series where I talk to interesting people about all things musical, joining the dots between music and lots of different areas. This series will have a focus on Clare-based artists, and you can follow the series Music As Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can listen on all the usual platforms, and please subscribe if you enjoy it. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Eddie Lenihan. Eddie is a world-renowned storyteller, folklorist and author who lives in Crehan, County Clare. The Clare Champion has described him as Ireland's greatest living storyteller. For almost 40 years, he's gathered stories across the country on Irish mythology, fairies and the supernatural. He's published more than 20 books and has his own podcast called Tell Me a Story. His most recent book is called The Man in the Big House. With brilliant stories he has collected from Jimmy Armstrong of Quinn, County Clare. I was lucky enough to have Eddie come to Crehan School as a child and tell us stories of the local landscape, the Otherworld and the fairy folk. He put the fear of God in us about touching anything to do with the fairies, such as fairy forts or fairy trees. Eddie's activism efforts to protect a fairy tree in Clare made international headlines in 1999 when he succeeded in altering a motorway project that would have caused the tree to be knocked. I really enjoyed talking to Eddie about these stories he's been collecting for 40 plus years. And we talked about how outstanding skill in music or sport was often credited as a gift from the otherworld. Eddie describes what an encounter with the good folk would likely entail, and had some great advice to offer. We also talk about the fiddle player and storyteller Junior Crehan and the kind of music around Brosna, County Kerry, where Eddie grew up. Hi Eddie, how are you doing?
We have company.
Thanks so much for talking to me today. We're here with your lovely dogs in your kitchen in Crehan.
Good, welcome.
Thanks very much. So we're here in Crehan, right beside the primary school where I went to school, where you used to come and tell us stories.
Did you come to school here?
I went to school here, yeah.
Oh, lad.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to grow up with you coming in, telling us stories all about the local landscape and everything.
I did. I still do occasionally.
Yeah. They're lucky to have you. So I'm here to ask you about the subject of music. And as I said to you, that I am doing this interview project, and what has come up in a number of interviews is the idea of musicians receiving tunes from the otherworld, the good people, the fairies. I know there's so many names for it, so I came to... Firstly, could you tell me, for anyone that hasn't heard you, what it is you do and what kind of stories you have been gathering for 40 plus years, I know.
It is impossible to say what kind of stories I've been gathering because all I have been doing is listening.
Yeah.
And whatever people will talk about, I collect.
Yeah.
And some are stories. Much of it is personal reminiscence. Much of it is social history, of course, because the people I collect from are the oldest. And when I look through my recordings, I'm looking at people of mainly 80s and their 90s, and some occasionally over 100. And when I look through most of them now, they're dead. And at least people like that, even though they're dead, what they told me, well, it remains. And that's valuable, I think, in that can never be repeated. Repeated in the sense that they told it, they're gone. And that would have gone with them, except that I was lucky enough that they were good enough to tell me about it. Because a person's personal reminiscences, that's their slant on what everybody knows. Because look, there's a whole generation of people living at the one time, but everybody has a different slant on that same existence. And some people, believe it or not, are more interesting than others. Some people go through life and they see nothing, practically. Other people, they're very, very, very sharp. And some people do things. Other people, things are done to them. Life is made up of all kinds of different people. And those are the kind of people that I have been recording all my life, or a good part of it. And it makes for a huge variety. And the stories I have been particularly interested in are fairy stories, because I've almost taken it as a motto at this stage when it comes to traditional things. If you don't find fairy stories, you won't find much else besides. You won't find much else besides. And
what do you mean by that?
I mean by that it takes a particular mindset to believe in the fairies and what they represent. A belief in the otherworldly. Now, there's many people who would say, what do you mean exactly by that, as you just said there? Everybody should believe in the otherworldly in the sense that, we all believe in God. But I dispute that. I'd say most people don't believe in any God. For example, I often wondered, at the consecration of the Mass, the solemn moment when that wafer of bread is being transubstantiated, as the word they have, into the body and blood of Christ. You can have a crowd back at the back of the church and they're talking about the hurling match. Now, do they believe in what's happening above there? Do they? Could they? Had they? Or else they just don't know. Or obviously something is wrong. And that has always been I've seen it myself. So, religion, the other world, do people believe in that other world? A lot of people certainly believed in the fairies and the otherworldly as it came down to us from the old people. Like, for example, not to be out on November Eve in pishogues, in the real sense of pishogues now, in doing your neighbour harm, in that sense of the word.
What, for someone who wouldn't understand the word pishogue, how would you explain it?
Putting eggs in the neighbour's hay, or putting raw meat in their garden in order that their crops would fail. That kind of evil-minded pishogues. That's a different thing that we're talking about. But pishogues, well, the other world meant something to those people in a bad sense. The other world had to be there in a good sense if it was there in a bad sense. And priests used to preach off of the altar about that. So obviously they believed in pishogues as being there, because people went to them, especially the Franciscans, about that. And when the missioners came around long ago, by God, they preached and could preach. They were the professional preachers. And those preachers, boy, they would frighten the life out of you. They were tremendous entertainers. They were entertainers.
I suppose how I came onto this topic was around hearing stories about people receiving tunes and music from the other world. Could you tell me a little bit about your experiences of that, of people receiving inspiration? Or
well, it's
tunes?
just not, you see, the belief always was about the fairies is that the fairies, they're like us in most ways, but they need a human being to do their business properly. And it doesn't matter what business that is, because, as I said, they're like us in most ways. They play football, they play hurling, they buy, they sell, they play music, they dance, all the things we do, they do. But they need a human being. And if you're the person chosen, you had better go with them. If you do, they'll reward you. If you don't, big trouble for you. You will be punished. And that's the reason why long ago, when people really did believe in the fairies and that you could meet them at any place, and remember most people were walking that time. If you were walking out at night to a session or to a card play, the chances are you'd be walking home through the fields taking a shortcut rather than walking all around by the roads coming home. I mean, if you could walk a mile through the fields rather than 3 miles around by the road, you were going to walk the shortcut if it was a reasonably fine night. So if you met the boys, well, you're going to be a little bit prepared, keep them happy if you could. And there's many stories, mainly about meeting them and actually play a hurling match. And people who are obliged in Kerry to be a football match, or wherever hurling was played or wherever football was played. But music was played all over the country. And so you'd be asked to step in. Now, in my case, I don't play any music. But I'd know better than to refuse. So I'd be offered the fiddle, or I'd be offered a set of pipes, or I'd be offered something, maybe a flute. Play regardless. You know, you might feel, geez, what do I do with this bloody instrument? But you know, you'd have seen somebody playing it someplace. Make an effort, and you'd find yourself, Jesus, I'm making some class of noise. And they'd dance. They wouldn't seem to care whether you were making balls of it or not, but they'd dance anyway, because they had been waiting for somebody to show up. They were waiting, and you were the person who had showed up. And they'd dance away for the whole night, and you were getting your confidence all the time. Jesus, the more you played, the more you saw you could play. It was bringing out a talent in you that you never knew you had. And when the morning came, they'd gather around you, good man entirely, great stuff entirely, and you can keep the instrument. That's your reward. And good night now, good luck. We were waiting for that for the last 200 years, and thank you very much. And they'd let you off. Delighted. And you came home safe. And of course the people at home wondering where you were. Now in some of the stories, you had been missing for 3 weeks. Another time you came home by the morning. But the people were, what in the name of God, that in your hand? An instrument? You with an instrument? Jesus, where do you steal that from? And you told them the story. And they would believe you until you sat down and played it. And people looking at you. A fella that never in your life played an instrument, no matter what kind of an instrument. And after that, of course, you went to this house and went to that house. And just as they had promised you, which they had, that what you did for us here now tonight, the reward isn't just the pipes or the flute or the fiddle or whatever it was, that'll make you a rich person. And of course, you went around from place to place to place after that. And of course, the first couple of places you were laughed at. Look who's coming, the man who, yes, he can't even dance, not mind playing an instrument. But that he did play. And people, of course, stopped. And they, oh, what is this? And they, of course, listened first. And didn't know what to make of it, because it was the strangest kind of music. But there was one thing about it. Oh, they danced. And it was strange music. But the odd thing was that the music that was played was only the one tune all night, and the people who were listening to it were hearing different tunes all night. It was only the one tune being played all night and every night, and no matter where the person went, he was playing different tune here, different tune, and of course the people were following him around. It was a bit like the fellows with the animals following him, the fellow in Grimm's fairy tales, the fellow with the leading the children, the
Pied Piper.
The Pied Piper. Yeah. The crowd were following him from house to house to house, and they were hearing different tunes every different night. He was only playing the one tune, so that was his reward for doing the favour, for the good people.
Yeah.
And he got to be a rich man eventually. He was able to buy a field and another field and another field, and eventually he owned a huge farm. And the end of the story was they're one of the biggest farmers in the parish to this very day.
From the stories, it seemed like it was often somebody who wasn't a very good musician or didn't play at all.
Oh yeah, and to the very same, you see, with not just musicians, but with a fellow who was always on the sideline watching the local hurlers of your age. He was useless. They'd call him into the team if all the subs were missing, if all the subs had got drunk and they had known. They'd call him in and he'd make a balls of it. But one particular night going home, they were there in a field that he was crossing where there was a fort in the next field, moonlit night, and he got the beck. Oh jeez, he saw the small crowd. And they weren't that small. They were, as one man told me, they were about the size of 6-year-old children. They weren't tiny. They were about the size of 6-year-olds. And there they were with the hurleys in their hands. And he was beckoned in. And of course now he was frightened, he said, and what could he do? There was no point in running from these boys. Now he thought he was imagining it first, but the sliotar was thrown out to him and he grabbed it, by nature kind of, and it was real. And he knew then that he wasn't seeing things, so in he went. And there wasn't a word, but he was asked to, this time they were missing a man, like before, and he was told his place, told where to play, and now as backs or forward, it didn't matter. He was told where he was going to play anyway, and the game went on, and his team won, and they gathered around him, and it was a great celebration anyway. And finally one of the captains came. Both of them came, and they were delighted, and they said they had been coming there for the last 200 years waiting for somebody to come in. And they congratulated him, and they gave him the hurley, and they said, bring that with you, and you'll be welcome no matter where you go. And not just that, they said, but bring it with you, and you'll be safe wherever you go. And he did. And the end of the story was, it wasn't just that he turned out to be a mighty hurler after, but any faction fight he ever was in, he'd only swing the hurley and they'd be falling like wheat around him. 5 or 6 of them in every side of him. That hurley, there was something about it that it made a man of him, as your man said. All because of that he had given them that help that night.
Yeah.
And right in a practical sense, and it was only half fun, but they always said that a tremendous hurler or a footballer or a musician, right down to our own generation, I had it said that somebody who was out of their generation with skill, hurler, footballer, musician, they were in the fairies. They were in the fairies. And it was a kind of a joke, but only a half a joke.
Yeah.
Where did they get the skill? They weren't normal musicians or hurlers or footballers. And I suppose the same would be true of runners, although that was never mentioned to me. That the likes of the Sonny O'Sullivans or whatever, where did they get skill like that?
Yeah, I suppose from reading some of those stories, like the music seems to have this, to be very powerful as well. Like it's not just like a formal performance, or that it could be for healing, or like it could be to put someone to sleep, or for joy, or for sadness. That it had all these kind of functions, and like that it was held in kind of high esteem, like a person who could play. And as you were saying, that it was often like, they must have got that from the other world.
Well, we know that. Songs are used for very many things, but from the old people who just fitted where they fitted, doing what they did. The music, obviously, more than songs, to them was a normal part of life, because musicians, there was quite a few musicians to say. Singers, well, you had the likes of Robbie McMahon and them, people like that, but they never said to me that they got their songs. They never made anything out of it like that. To them, they were good singers. They were good singers by nature. They got their songs passed down to them, or in the case of Robbie was a very creative man, just like Junior Crehan. They were able to compose ballads. They were composers. But there were other people who were balladeers, who composed things about local events, like your man in Broadford, Michael Kennedy. There were quite a few of those at the time of the Troubles as well, which was a dangerous thing, because you could get into serious bother at that time by composing ballads about local events, that might affect one side or the other. But that's gone. All that kind of skill at balladeering. Not, well, I won't say it is all gone, but practically all gone, because, well, you see, there's no need of it now. But we show the sign of it. Because, you see, look at the kind of music that's popular now. American nonsense music. There'll always be only a few masters at anything. That's in the very nature of be it writing, music, storytelling, anything. There's only, you'll get a lot of people who are going to be good players. How many Chris Dronies will you get at the small box?
Yeah.
How many fiddlers like Martin Hayes, I suppose? How many, it doesn't matter in what.
In my reading about these ideas, I was surprised how many of the masters, will say, as we were saying, like, received their inspiration for specific tunes, like from the Otherworld. So, like the likes of Turtle Carolyn or Junior Crehan, as you mentioned, or Mickey Doherty up in Donegal. Yeah, it was interesting to me that in all these different parts of the country, they were all similar stories, and it was often fiddle players or pipers, and it was rarely songs. It was mostly tunes received from. And yeah, you were saying you met and talked to Junior Crehan many times.
I did.
He was a great storyteller.
And a most interesting man. And you see, the thing about him was, the thing about Junior was that Junior was a good storyteller. He knew his tradition, he knew his place, and he knew his people. And that's the reason why Junior was good. He wasn't just your average fiddler. He wasn't just your man who had learned his fiddle playing out of books or anything like that. He wasn't just somebody who had gone up through the ranks of cultists like that. Junior belonged in his place. He was a man who had learned his fiddling from the people who came before him of that place. And he could tell you the history of the old people who had visited houses, who no doubt who had got their fiddling and the rest of it from the people before them. And that's gone. That's gone. To be like Robbie McMahon and the singing. Robbie belonged to a place. And it was their own home place. There was people who belonged. And nowadays, you see, the difference is people are so busy going here, there, here, there, chasing their tails. And it's hard to belong to a place today.
It's a different concept of time.
It is.
In these stories, people often enter kind of a time.
I often ask to see these older people, how did it happen to be that when people only had horse and cars, you were travelling around 5-6 miles an hour? How did they make the time to? From West Clare sometimes, from Mullock, places like this, they had to go to Ennis of a day with a rail of bonavs or something like that. And they had to come in to the market to sell them, if they did. occasionally. Very often there'd be markets in smaller towns too in Ishdiamond and that, but they had to come to Ennis sometimes. How did they find the time to do that? And to go home again, all in the one day? And they did. Nowadays, we'll have time to go to Ennis with the car, and we're constantly in a rush. And do we get anything more done? Not really. Not really. We're constantly rushing, and I often wonder, for what? At the end of the day, when you sit down, what did I do today? We have a different concept of time than they had, and they still managed to get their business done in a civilised way.
I doubt Junior Crehan was rushing around the place, was he?
I'm sure when he was a young man, he had to do a lot of hard work, and most of them had. They had to go to the bog, they had to save the hay, all by hand, and they had to rear families, and they had to go out then and enjoy themselves too, play the fiddle, and they did. They managed to enjoy themselves, and they managed to do all those things. And they saw bad times, and they saw hard times, and they survived somehow. And money was very scarce, and there was no point in complaining, because there was no one to listen to you. Get on with it.
I heard stories about Junior and his tune, The Leprechaun Jig, and how he was given this tune by a leprechaun, and I suppose his craft of storytelling was, and the playing music at home, that was the form of entertainment at the time, wasn't it? It was he would have been an important figure, would he? At the time, like in that community, like to be able to tell stories like that.
Yes. Yeah. Even though storytelling even then was dying out.
Yeah.
It was. There wouldn't have been a great audience for storytelling anymore, because it was music and dances rather than stories. Because the bother you see with stories always has been, you need quietness. You need quietness. And in a pub, you won't get that. Not that many people could afford pubs, but the people who did want to go to pubs, they wanted to go out to enjoy themselves, because it's such a seldom thing. And on a fair day is when an awful lot of people visited pubs, and by God, you wouldn't want to get quietness in a pub on a fair day. On a weekday, if people went out just to chat, and they had their own bit of stories in the form of gossip. But as regards the old-time storytellers, that was done around the fire. And
would it be at, let's say, house gatherings or house dances? Would there be
it might have been
a time for a story?
Well, there might, if there was a bigger house, yes.
Yeah.
But the dances took place in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And dances, you see, made noise. Dances made noise, and music made noise, and you need a bit of quietness from stories.
Yeah.
So the number of places that you would have had storytelling, there were certain houses that were noted for that. Yeah. They were noted for that, but not too many.
Did you grow up with these house
no.
dances?
Oh no.
They weren't down in Kerry?
Not at all.
At the time, no.
No, that I would have been in the village.
Yeah.
And as far as I knew, there was never any house dances in any of the houses in the village. I never remember any of them. There was, I can never remember any house there that there was a house dance held in. Never. There were some great musicians in Brosna though, the Paddy Juries, the O'Connors, they were famous musicians all over Kerry. If you mention the Paddy Juries to musicians even in Clare here, they'd be known.
And dancing as well.
Oh yes. Kerry slides. Kerry slides.
Yeah.
The Slieve Lucre music.
Yeah.
They'd be the Brosna kind of music now.
Yeah.
But that I would recognise. You couldn't mistake Kerry slides.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
very energetic dance.
Absolutely.
I imagine fairies dancing to Shlivuka slides. I don't know. That's what I have in my mind if I think about fairies dancing.
Well, there was good musicians there, very good musicians, especially with the box, the accordion. So for some reason, it was popular.
The accordion, yeah.
It was popular there around.
And down around the Blasket Islands, like there's, you know, great stories and great music from down there as well.
Yeah,
like,
there would be down
you know, the tune Port Nabucco.
Port Nabucco, yes. Port Nabucco, they said was got down there. And they said that came from the seals. The seals, which of course there's a big lot of stories about, that the seals were human beings in disguise. And that was the reason why fishermen were very reluctant to kill seals, because because they might be killing their own kind. Which I was very surprised to hear there a couple of years ago, that some of those same West Kerry fishermen were killing seals because they were interfering with salmon stocks.
Oh, right, okay.
Their grandparents wouldn't have done that. Which again just shows how the tradition, bye-bye, traditions have been lost. They would surely have found another way of doing it. They would have found another way of doing it besides killing them.
I think there's some people trying to preserve these traditions. I think that there is. I think during like the past couple of years, when everyone was forced, you know, you're forced to stay in Ireland, there seems to be a bit of a renewed interest in things like the Irish language and
that's a great thing. It can only be for the good. It can only be for the good. But it needs a new thinking, the Irish language, a real think in the way it is being taught. They should concentrate now on the spoken, because the written, if the spoken is got right, the written can be brought in after. But if it isn't spoken, you're finished. And concentrate on, you know, the folklorist, and concentrate on the basic rules of grammar in a spoken sense. Like we were always taught things like, you know, for this torocti for free. You know, get those right, you know, just get them in your head, torocti for free. You know, and have the young lads to know them straight out. That they would, even before they know what I mean, you know, torocti for free. And they can know what I mean afterwards and how to use them. But, you know, just that they would like to know them like a rhyme. And you'd be surprised how things like that count for them afterwards. And they make no sense writing things down in Irish. But have the thing spoken, because otherwise it'll be like it is. A thing that they just want to throw from them the minute they come out of school, because it's something they hate.
I was reading the book 32 Words for Fields, Manchon McGann's book, and he was talking about like the Irish language and the words, like, you know, studying these words are a way to understand the kind of view of the world that, you know, of this time, like these stories you're telling you about, and, you know, words like Caharine is a field that fairies have flattened from dancing, I think. And, you know, and it's absolutely full, like, with words like that. Adogi is a spell, being under a spell from fairies. So I think it's totally undeniable that this connection to the other world, if you look at the language, is really, really part of everyday life, like, wasn't it? You know,
probably.
Music and all parts of life. You know?
Well, the next series now I'm doing of podcasts is all about Irish place names.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
The whole series. So as soon as I can get that, I have most of it done, but as soon as I can get somebody to put it out on these platforms that the last two went out on, I'll do it. Because I think people would be interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know.
That's it. Eddie, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your stories, and
I hope you're successful in here with what you're doing, and that you can finish it out.
Yeah.
And well, you will finish it out, but that you can finish it out to your own satisfaction, which is always the thing.
Yes. Thank you for listening to the Music As podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. You can follow the podcast at Music As Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and now on YouTube also. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast if you enjoy it. See you next time.